Union, the Confederate cavalry out in front, when they reach Timmy's branch, are going to be fired upon. They're going to be challenged by pickets from the companies D, B, and C of the 1st Kentucky Cavalry. And the first fatality will occur will be Lieutenant Miller. Lieutenant Miller will be wounded. Some of his comrades will carry him over under some trees and leave him, but by the next day he has died, dying of bleeding to death and of the weather conditions. We're now approaching Timmy's branch, and we're going to do a Huey here.
Up at the church.
I thought you told me once we were doing it Timmy's branch.
I lied.
Well, we could have turned there, but we're going down here, but you should be more clear. You said Timmy's branch. We're going down to the Baptist church. We're just turning. All right, we're using it as a turnaround. Now up there at Timmy's branch. All right, Timmy's branch. Let's. I'm talking now. We know he's going to turn the bus. I've got to remember what you're interrupting me, and I get breaking my train of thought. The Confederates are approaching on this road. They're still going through a howling wilderness, and up at Timmy's branch are posted 2 companies of the 1st Kentucky Cavalry, B and C, supported nearby by 2 companies of the 10th Indiana. So the Confederate plan to take the Union by surprise is going to be frustrated as the Confederates, the Confederate vanguard, cavalry up in front, is going to be approaching Timmy's branch up ahead. And there they are, they're challenged. Now the Confederate password is Kentucky. That's going to be more important later on when we get up to where the heavy fighting starts. But here, there's going to be a skirmish here, and a messenger is going to be sent galloping back to Logan's Crossroads to alert the Federals that the Confederates are coming. And this is Timmy's branch. Timmy's branch begins to our left and drains to our right, draining into Fishing Creek. So this is where the first shots are fired. And if you were traveling by car, we would do a debusing stop there. Now there's going to be continuous skirmishing as the Confederate cavalry pushes back the Union pickets, giving the Union time to sound the long roll back in their camp, back at Logan's Crossroads. So by the time they're going to top the high ground in the local cemetery, where the Confederate rear guard will form, the Federals have arrived here in substantial numbers. The rest of the other 8 companies of the 10th Indiana, the 4th, the rest of the 1st Kentucky Cavalry, and the men of the 4th Kentucky Infantry, commanded by Speed Fry. And then initially, the initiative will be with the Confederates. They'll initially push back the Federals and push them back about a half a mile or so. But again, the Union, when they have received the reinforcements, they will advance up to the principal place of where the fighting is going to take place. Now, of course, we're going up on this ridge. Here we're going this ridge up here beyond the cemetery, beyond the hospital. The Confederate hospital was a field hospital in a rude settlement off to our right, of which only, off to our left, of which only a few scattered stones remain. So this, if you were doing a tour or a all-day tour of the field, we would pause here and get off the bus, or you're out of your car. Now the Confederate rear guard, the last shots of the battle, are fought from the Confederate rear guard up on this high ground, the 16th Alabama on our right, and Rutledge's batteries in front. And there, of course, is for Dorothea Burton Hudson, being her married name, is buried. Now we're dropping down here. How much time do we have here, Ryan? No. We're going down to Beach Grove, remember? According to my instructions.
Chaos here.
How long do we have here?
The deputy leadership. Long enough to do the entire fence.
Okay. No, I thought you were going to Beach Grove. You got to make this clear to me. Now we approached the area here on the present day highway. Again, look at your map, 15. We approached the area on the new alignment of the road going down to Zollicoffer's lair, Beach Grove, or where the Confederates marched from. The road, if we had continued the way we were going, where we turned around at the church, we would have gone another 7 miles and we would have been at Beach Grove. Beach Grove is where the Confederates are going to march from on the night of Saturday the 18th to bring on the battle that will become known by more names than any other battle in the Civil War, but I'm going to refer to it as Mill Springs consistently. When Zollicoffer was, and I'm sure Will told you in the bus, when he moved over to Jamestown to approach this area from the south, and then to Monticello, 10 miles south of Mill Springs, to reconnoiter the best place to take a position to threaten the Union forces, whom he had collided with at the Battle of Camp Wildcat on the 21st day of October. His reconnaissance will show that a good place to position his men is at Mill Springs, which has had a mill since in the late 18th century, but the mill operating there then was operating since 1818, that period. He wants a mill. So it shows us an agricultural surplus in the area and where they can grind grain. It's on high ground. It's on a river that's near the head of navigation of the Cumberland River, and it's reasonably secure because he's south of the Cumberland River. He will fortify that camp looking to the south, to the west, to the east, with his back to the river. But he then makes an error, moving his camp across the river onto the Beach Grove side of the river, and will entrench his camp there again. That would be the entrenched line about a mile in extent. The trenches are there, and that's where he is when hard-drinking General George Crittenden, the son of the senator and the older brother of Tom, who we talked about briefly yesterday. Crittenden is a West Pointer. He has served in the Mexican War, but he has a real drinking problem, much like some of your members in the Round Table in the old Civil War Round Table, who have become legendary. On learning that Thomas is approaching, Thomas having marched southward from Lebanon, 40 miles, and the most terrible roads he's ever seen, and then marching east about 50 miles. He had left Lebanon on the 2nd day of January, and it's so muddy, conditions so atrocious, he does not approach Logan's Crossroads till the evening of the 17th day of January. His name is known to year of slow trot, would be further underscored there. As we said, and Will did on his buffs, Alvin Shep, and I know a lot of people have never heard that, but I know people who are related to them, and they pronounce their name Shep. Alvin Shep is over at Somerset, where he's been for some time, and he's been reporting on the Zollicoffer lair, and he is going to receive orders from Thomas, with the rivers very high, that he is to bring his men, a substantial group of his men, from Somerset on the 18th, cross Fishing Creek, about a mile and a half upstream from where we are, with the water going to be up to a tall man's crotch and a short man's shoulder blades, holding on with one hand on a rope as they go across. And he's not going to lose any people from drowning. I'm not going to say how many people he's going to lose from that experience of wading that river in very cold weather. But he has arrived here. And that is something that the Confederates do not know. They believe that Fishing Creek is too high to cross. And in their day-long discussions on the 18th, whether to evacuate, using the Noble Ellis to shift them with a good planning to the south side of the Cumberland, whether to wait attack behind the earthworks at Beach Grove or seize the initiative and attack the enemy. And his final decision is going to be attack the enemy. One person that remembers later, after everybody has had problems, Zollicoffer is dead, he's going to remember that both Crittenden and Carroll are drunk as they're doing their planning. Whether they're drunk or not, they do not reconnoiter this road. The road that goes down to Beach Grove is a mud road. It is a narrow road, winds through the woods, passing an isolated farmstead on the way. There'll be a march from hell that night. The old-timers around table can remember our visit to Fredericksburg, in which one of your men won the Confederate Purple Heart. And that's the only time I've ever suspended a tour because of weather. At 3 o'clock, it'd be just like that. But of course, as Will told you in your bus, they're going to run into the pickets, 2 companies of pickets from the 1st Kentucky down there at Timmy's branch. The Federals, a fast rider, will spur back and alert the Federals. As they're going to remember some of the people, it takes Thomas is a portly fellow and moves rather slowly, 1/2 hour to dress, which is rather slow to dress. And but it's going to be a warning that the enemy is coming. And as the skirmishers fall back, they will have alerted the feds, and by the time they reach this area, a little beyond where we're standing now, the Federals have turned out the 4th Kentucky, the other 8 companies of the 10th Indiana that were not on picket, and the rest of the 1st Kentucky, which will begin the engagement a short distance from us. And probably the best way to tell the battle is by walking the trail, as it's going to be most of the fighting in this area, and we will Will go over the leading ins that he wants to add the lead in, and then we will go along on the walking tour, and we'll talk at various steps on the walking tour as the battle develops here. This is and then leave enough time to talk about the memorial area when we get back here, which is very important. Will?
Well, I want to, I think some of you have met the real ramrod behind Mill Springs Battlefield, Bill Nykirk over here. Now, Bill is a local fella, and Bill's a local man, and I want to share with you a description of some of the locals from whom he's descended here, as described by a captain in the 2nd Minnesota who was marching to this area in part of Thomas's relief corps for General Schaff. He says the farms were small but partially miserably cultivated. The dwellings were mostly log cabins of 1 or 2 rooms, weather-beaten and wretched, and the people ignorant and unthrifty in character and quite unsettled about the war. They had no slaves and had in fact but little of anything, and could apparently, if let alone, have got along in their humble way under any kind of government or none at all. But they were not to be left alone. Regiments were being recruited in the same neighborhoods for both armies, and most of the men of military age had got into one or the other. In many cases, sons of the same family enlisting in opposing regiments. The corn cribs and hog yards had been depleted in turn by Zollicoffer's foragers and Wolford's Union cavalry. That's the 1st Kentucky Cavalry. There was as an old farmer said, quote, "Nothing to feed the hogs and no hogs to feed." The old men and women, this man reported, regarded our progress through the county with little apparent interest of curiosity, sometimes asking, "What regiment is yours?" And then following up the answer by, "What state is Minnesota in?" So these are the ancestors of Bill Nykirk and all of his people here in Pulaski County who have done such great work at Mill Springs.
About the Yankees in either.
Tell him what all your forebears were.
They're all Yankees.
All Yankees. Well, that's pretty typical.
My great-grandfather fought here at the 12th Kentucky. Good Union boy.
That's right. That's right. As we said yesterday, most Kentuckians much better Confederates after the war than they were during it.
That's right. Oh, absolutely.
We're not going to talk about Zollicoffer until we get back. Is that the?
We'll talk about him where he gets up there with the
all right.
with the interpretive mark.
Well,
we'll talk about the commemoration after we get
all
back.
right. I've got some descriptions of Zollicoffer, but we'll wait till you cue me.
Any questions? Now, when we're going to move out, when the Confederates arrive in this area, they're going to deploy in the center. Generally on this side of the road where we are, they're going to have some Mississippians that are probably wondering where in the hell we are. Because they're not from this part. The part of Mississippi they're from is not like this. It's the 15th Mississippi. They played them up highly in the dioramas inside the museum. And they've done research, and you can see the Mississippians had uniforms. and rather interesting uniforms, as you saw in the museum there. And they also have one flag, which is going to be captured, which is going to be very well known because Yankee newspaper correspondents like to describe one of the flags that the Mississippians will have carrying, it'll say Mississippi Butchers on it. And when they defeat the Confederates, there'll be some good puns on that battle flag of the 15th Mississippi. Now, they are going to be in the area where we are and moving immediately to the east of the road. On their right is going to be the 20th Tennessee, and on their commanded by Colonel Battle, and on their left is going to be the 19th Tennessee, commanded by Colonel Cumming. Now, these people, if you have good memories, you met them all at Shiloh last year. And you met them all where we spent a considerable time at Shiloh last year, in and around at the time that Albert Sidney Johnston loses his life. These people were heavily involved around him. And they're going to be the first people to be committed, and they will, and we're going to talk about the various unions. Now, first, the union we're going to be dealing with are going to be the 1st Kentucky Cavalry, we're going to talk about the 10th Indiana, Colonel Munson. We'll hear about him 2 days from now, and we're going to hear a lot about Colonel Speed Fry, and we're going to hear a lot about Felix Zollicoffer, as that's going to be very crucial to what happens to him. You hardly know where George Crittenden and Carroll are until after Crittenden becomes a commanding officer here. Crittenden and Carroll, you didn't hear about them at Shiloh because they were under arrest for drunkenness, and will be cashiered disappear from the Confederate Army. If you had been with us if he had not been a drunk, he would have been commanding Breckinridge's forces at the Battle of Shiloh, and Carroll would be commanding a brigade. You can see the wages of drunkenness and what it'll do to you, and you'll end up the state librarian, a sinecure in your later life. That's what George Crittenden ends up being. Okay?
Well, speaking of Crittenden, you know that we talked on our bus, I'm sure Ed talked on bus number 1 about the options that Crittenden has. He is the ranking Confederate officer here. He's making the calls. And whether or not that council of war involved 2 inebriated generals or not, this is the description by Crittenden of why he decided to make the attack. Because he did have the option of doing what? He could have stayed on the defense at Beech Grove, or he could have attempted to withdraw and avoid a battle altogether. But instead, he decided to move forward. And so it's his decision, 7 or 8 miles south of us at Beech Grove, that brings on the engagement we'll be spending the next 90 minutes studying. He says, in the condition of my command, I could array for battle about 4,000 effective men. Absolute want of the necessary provisions to feed my command was present. The country around was barren or exhausted. Communications with Nashville by water was cut off by a force of the enemy occupying the river below us. The line of communication in rear was too long to admit of winter transportation and extended through a barren or exhausted country. To defend Beech Grove required me to draw into it the force from Mill Springs. From the course of the river and the condition of things, it was easy for a detachment from the force of the enemy occupying it below to cross over, intercept the line of land communication, and taking Mill Springs entirely prevent my recrossing of the Cumberland. This river, greatly swollen with high muddy banks, was a troublesome barrier in the rear of Beech Grove. Transportation over it was, at best, very difficult. A small stern-wheel steamboat, that's the Noble Ellis that Ed mentioned, with 2 flatboats were the only means of crossing. Beech Grove was protected in front by earthworks, but these incomplete and insufficient, and necessarily of such extent that I had not force to defend them. The range of our artillery was bad, and there were commanding positions for the batteries of the enemy. Every effort had been made to provision the command to increase the means of crossing the river and to perfect the works for defense under the charge of a skillful officer. When I first heard that the enemy was approaching it in front, it was my opinion that I could not retire with my command, artillery, transportation, camp, garrison, equipage, baggage, and cavalry horses from Beech Grove to Mill Springs without information of such a movement reaching the enemy. And a consequent attack loss, I was out of reach of support or reinforcement. Under these circumstances, now that's a lot of rationale. Under these circumstances, I determined not to retreat without a battle. I decided that it was best to attack the enemy if possible before the Somerset force, that Shop's brigade, could cross Fishing Creek. I could reasonably expect much from a bold attack and from the spirit of my command. So that's the rationale. He can't stay where he is. He can't retreat with safety. And the only way he can buy the time necessary to get his force across the Cumberland River is to drive these Federals back onto their heels and then give the Confederates the chance to retreat in safety. Added to that was the report of the civilian who came to Beech Grove on that dank, cold night of January 18th and reported that there were only 2 Greene regiments arrived at Logan's Crossroads. So combined with all this rationale, he thinks that the force ahead of him is weak enough to overwhelm. And there you have the reason for this assault.
Well, so I can announce how far the walking tour is. What is the total distance? There's drawings of the battle. Here you can get a good idea. There is this ravine. This ravine will play a major part in the battle that drops off and it discharges in a northeasterly direction. Now, the 2 regiments I was discussing, the 15th Mississippi and the 20th Tennessee, will always be on this side of the road. And we're going to find out, there's going to be the reconstructed key fields here, as you can see, and key fence lines. The key fence lines are important in understanding the situation as it develops in which General Zollicoffer is going to lose his life. Now remember, his body is going to be found by the Zolly tree, but they're going to move his body around a little, and as you're going to find, they don't treat the body with much respect. That's why we're that scene up there of the 2 discussing is not going to take place there. It's going to take up there where we're going to be later on, and that's where his body is going to be placed. And he's going to lose lots of pieces of his clothes to those Yankees pursuers, and he's going to lose a lot of hair off of his both his beard and his hair. So particularly notice the terrain you're fighting in, and you're going to have a cornfield again. We seem to have them again and again. Okay?
Here, a couple of things to bear in mind. I'm facing nominally north. This is going to be the flow of the Confederate attacks are going to be north to south and northeast to southwest coming out of that ravine. You've got clear ground for 100 yards or so on either side of the road. And then the key ground, that ravine over there, which today is what we would call open woods, was then more thickly wooded than it is today. And on the other side of the road was much more thickly wooded. I mean, there wasn't open fields like you see today off of the road. So when you think about Mill Springs and the conditions under which they fought, more wooded than it is today, miserable weather, 35 degrees, sleeting and raining, foggy, heavy air, could not see things because of the battle smoke and the fog, and then you've got more woods out here. So if Ed's descriptions of these regimental, and this is a regimental battle, not a brigade battle. You understand by regiments what happens out here. If it seems odd that these guys are stumbling into one another and fighting at such close quarters, it seems to make no sense as they come out, boiling out of that ravine and attacking at point-blank range. Bear in mind the conditions under which the fighting occurred, and it'll make a little more sense to you why these guys do what they do. Well, harder to see. Today, you can still see that ground. If you came up out of those woods and were up on the high ground that you could be seen, obviously there'd be no trouble discerning your presence. Then it would have been more thickly wooded. Thomas can see the battlefield with the aid of glasses from the high ground where the National Cemetery is now located.
Thomas does not get on the battlefield early, and he did came up on the battlefield and suffered the same fate as Wildcat. Now, as Will pointed out, what's really important, and they made a good point of it in the closing part of the movie, arriving late in the day is the regiment that is the best drilled of any. And they are going to be, a large number of them, veterans of the 48 Revolution in Germany. And of course, they would be rather liberals, because the liberals did not do well in the 48 Revolution in Germany. and in the language, I don't know Robert McCook, maybe it was an intellectual who can speak German, because the first language in the 9th Ohio is German. And they will publish their regimental history in German, in Gothic, not Arabic Gothic, Arabic. So, and they make a good point of it. When he arrives at the opportune time, Robert McCook, and he is going to be wounded but not badly. And they're arriving at the key moment, and they are going to be on the west side of the road.
Bill, any chance that, are you ever trying to get this land?
Oh, we own all of it.
You've got it now? You're going to be
The
able
only thing we don't own is where the red barn is, and that 13 acres. We own everything. Matter of fact, the land you're standing on, we just bought last Monday.
Excellent.
Planning.
And they made a point that they can maneuver much better. And of course, they arrive when the Confederates are been in action for about either marching. I will tell you, marching is worse than combat, because the adrenaline doesn't really pump when you're marching. Your pain and suffering does. And so they will arrive at the ideal time, because the Confederates are exhausting their ammunition, and since a lot of the Confederates do not have cartridge boxes, they're using makeshift ones, and the paper cartridges for the come in paper wrapping, and they're getting they have more trouble of getting them wet and soft from the moisture rather than the others. And even the Confederates have a substantial number of flintlocks, and flintlocks have a lot more trouble than muskets of being discharged. So they arrive at a good time to look good, and they do look good. And I think the movie made a good point of it when they arrive, and they turn what was the Confederates were beginning to reach both physical exhaustion and exhaustion of weaponry and such to play probably a more decisive role than if they'd reached earlier today. All right? I just want to bring that up because arrival of the 9th Ohio. Almost all of them are from Cincinnati over the Rhine. They have been in the United States. These are not second-generation German boys. They're first German boys, and you don't hear any jokes being made about these, such as I fight Smitsiegel, or talking about them at Gettysburg and at Chancellorsville. Because here you can see in this painting who is breaking right here. And there, of course, is Robert McCook right there. And there is, maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll even hear what Gustav Kamerling has to say. Maybe Will has the remarks about him, because he is a regimental commander. McCook organized the regiment, and McCook is a brigade commander here. But he's traveling with these people. And you heard from our host, they have just closed on that land across the road where this bayonet charge took place. And I would lay money these guys know and like the bayonet. I would also argue that these guys in butternut and various type uniforms don't know the bayonet very well. It would be like Baron von Steuben, and they think of the difference he made in the Continental Army. Will?
Well, I have all the quotes, Ed, but they're all in German and I can't read them. So I'll have to pass.
Where is he?
What's that, Will?
I said all my quotes are in German and I can't read them, so I'll have to pass.
You can't read it? Well, I'm afraid most of us wouldn't understand them. So. Imagine how those Confederates feel on that side of the road when sweeping in to strike them in the flank and rear on those German boys. German remarks.
Well, I asked Dave if I could say something here, something we found. Number one, this fence is on the exact location it was at the time of the battle. How do we know that? The Michigan engineers drew a very detailed map of this battle afterwards for the official records. And they talk about an old dirt road that came up through here. And if you notice, you're standing in an old dirt road over there. It goes down around side this hill, goes out all the way back to the museum. So when we cleared this land off the trees, we found the road and we were able to put it back. Metal-taking wise, we found the Union stuff on that side, a lot of Confederate stuff on this side. More importantly, behind me, you see these white stakes. As you all well know, most of you know that during the Civil War, as a soldier reached back to load his musket, he'd pull a bullet out, and another one would drop on the ground a lot of times. So anytime that we find a row of dropped bullets in a line, it tells me a regiment stood there. Look how far from the fence it was. This is the tactics of the Civil War. Remember this first fight for these guys. Less than 20 yards away from the fence, they stopped, they loaded, they fired at the Union soldiers behind the fence. And if you know, in the 2nd Minnesota, in their letters, states comment that when they got up to the split rail fence, so they couldn't see the fence when George Thomas ordered them to it. So they had to get on their knees and look under the smoke to be able to tell where the fence was. So when we moved up to the fence, we could see a regiment of Confederates standing 40 yards in front of us. As we leveled down to fire at them, imagine our surprise when we looked in the corners of the fence and there was another regiment of Confederates looking up at us. And this is where they had the hand-to-hand combat, and most savage part of the fight happened on this fence. Neither side could get over it. It was just a fight through it. We had a very good learning experience here ourselves. 2 years ago, we had a national reenactment here. We've only had 2, won't have any more. And the deal was that I had 1,500 Union troops behind this fence going all the way into that cornfield. I had 2,000 Confederates attacking out of this ravine during the reenactment. As a Federal soldier, you could not see the Confederates at all, even in daylight like today. So we got the real mind vision of what it was like if the smoke and fog was down there. The second thing we learned was we did it in real time. First time as a reenactor we ever done a battle in real time. We took 3.5 hours to fight this fight. The Confederates were to attack up this hill 7 times. After the 5th time, they wouldn't come up it anymore. They were so physically exhausted. You know, I'm sure we're older and all that kind of stuff, but still, that taught us a lot of the Confederates' defeat here is that they were doing all the physical, strenuous work. The Union just stood behind the fence. And the same thing happened when the Confederates start to retreat. Now the fresh troops of the Union, all they got to do is come over the fence, and it makes a whole difference. And there's nothing that you can read in a book that makes you understand that until you're on the field doing it yourself and realize, you know, why couldn't they, you know, do different? What I am surprised about is literally the thousands and thousands and thousands of bullets that we're digging up on this battlefield. And we're doing it in a correct way. I mean, don't think we're out here just raping the land. When we're doing metal taking out here, and we do it twice a year, we're marking each one of them with a stake, we're surveying them in, we're putting them on a big map. It's giving us the ebb and flow of how this battle really happened. What's good for us is that the 15th Mississippi is the only one that had the 54 caliber musket. When we find their bullets, we know where they were. When the only 4 regiments of the Union had the mini ball, so we know where they were. The rest of it's all a conglomerate of 69 and 75 calibers and all kinds of combinations. But we're finding out that there was a whole lot of ammunition fired here, whether their muskets were firing or not firing. There's an awful lot of bullets out here. Again, I think a lot of it was just firing blindly into the smoke and fog. There's somewhere over there, shoot that direction. For only be, you know, less than 600 casualties in this battle. There's over 4,000 bullets fired here. Because Confederates and Union both ran ammunition twice. So, but anyhow, that's all I want to say. It's a good spot to tell you about that little part. And
now the regiment he mentioned here is also going to be a late arriving regiment. They are going to arrive here to replace the 4th Kentucky, which has fired up their route. They arrived before the 9th Ohio. And again, as a report, as archaeology, and the reason you have to walk the battlefield, as we stressed yesterday, to really understand it, and thanks to the Michigan 1st Regiment of Michigan Engineers and Mechanics for the road, that they know this fence was right where you're standing. And you're going to have various regiments behind this. The one he was talking about was the 1st Minnesota, the 2nd Minnesota. You're going to have earlier behind this fence, and you're going to have out in front of here earlier. You're going to have the 15th Mississippi, and earlier here on the Union side, you're going to have the 4th Kentucky, and the 4th Kentucky is going to be, I'm going to say this way, it might not be Speed Fry, but it's going to be a member of the 4th Kentucky that is going to kill General Zollicoffer. And it well might be this is in the area where Zollicoffer spots the earlier in the day behind this fence here. You remember this fence was here, we know it was, and we know that General Zollicoffer he's in charge, as such as there is, of a battle that has become a battle of regiments against regiments, detachments against detachments, And Zollicoffer would be probably up there on the high ground, someplace where we see the stars and bars. And he is going to be wearing a raincoat, and it's probably white, but it appears to be can be looking almost green. He's wearing, and Zollicoffer has a physical problem. And his physical problem, he is very nearsighted. And being very nearsighted, the lenses in his glasses undoubtedly look like those in a bottle of a Coke bottle. And that is going to be, and you know, if you've been out in the rain, people who wear glasses, I fortunately only have to use them for reading. You can notice, even if I forget to take them off when I go outside and get them in rain, in cold rain, they get hard to see out of, don't they? So this is going to play into possibly somewhere along this fence that he is going to be sitting his horse up there, and he is going to notice men are behind a fence firing on his people. And again, as archaeology shows, it could be the 15th Mississippi out in front of here, because they found their rounds, as he said, and he is going to come down here because he believes that these people behind that fence are Confederates, and they're firing. It's the same problem. He believes they're Confederates, and he is going to ride out to discuss the strategic situation with them. And also, Colonel Fry is going to ride out, and they're going to be conversing somewhere out in front of this fence. And Fry has an advantage on, though at first he's unsure of what side he is, but Fry is going to have an advantage on Zollicoffer. And his advantage on Zollicoffer is when Zollicoffer's aide, Captain Frog, rides up and tells Zollicoffer those are the enemy there. Somewhere out in near this fence is involved. Somewhere out in front of this fence, because behind this fence, in an earlier phase of the battle, is the 4th Kentucky, and he is going to call out a warning to Zollicoffer, and that those are the enemy there. And of course, the Confederates are over there, right in front of them, and as we're going to find out, Fry is going to start skedaddling back toward this fence, and of course, by this time, Zollicoffer, Fry yelling to his men, and they're going to open fire. Now, Fry is going to be said as the man, but there's going to be a volley fired at Zollicoffer at this time. And what did you say? 3 times he's hit?
Yeah.
So if he's hit 3 times, but he's going to die almost instantly, and the man that had thrown his cover on him, his aide, is also going to die in the same volley. So we'll read some descriptions of the time as it happened. So sure, it's in because it's somewhere out in this area, because this is this fence. And again, as Brother Nykerk has said, we know that fence is here. We know lots of different regiments were behind it, and we know a lot of people. And I guess you said where at least 5 regiments were because of the caliber of the rounds they're firing. The 15th Mississippi being 1 because they fire a 54 caliber. So, Will?
All right. Switch microphones here. I sound like I'm on. Bill and our other colleagues from the park can correct me if I'm wrong, but this fence is going to continue down into the lower ground where the Confederate attacks are also going to take place. And the gentleman here informs me that their best information is that the fence continued down to where you see those isolated fruit trees down there. So that fence, this fence line, which is such a key terrain feature as that is described on the battlefield, is going to run from the low ground up this slope and terminate up somewhere near where the road is today. It's also going to divide, as Ed indicated, the Federals on this side of it from the Confederate attacks, which are going to emanate from the ravine, where we're going to be walking in a few minutes, and the ridge behind it, which was more heavily wooded than it is today, and provided excellent cover in terms of both defilade and from the brush for the Confederates to come out and make their assaults. So that's, I think there are 3 episodes I want to quote from here. Ed has talked briefly about each of them. First are the initial assaults. The 15th Mississippi coming up against the 4th Kentucky here, commanded by a man with another wonderful Kentucky name, Speed Fry. Speed Fry is from Boyle County, where Perryville was located. So he, along with another Kentucky Unionist named Boyle, are 2 native sons of that county. Speed Fry also went to Wabash College in Indiana. And so Fry is out here with the 4th Kentucky. And the 15th Mississippi, Colonel Walthall is making some of the initial assaults across this very ground where we are. A line officer from the 15th Mississippi wrote, Colonel Walthall cried out and asked, "Who are you?" They replied, "Kentuckians." We fellows insisted that they had said Kentucky, which was the password Crittenden had designated. So Walthall, taking the flag and walking about 8 yards in front, accompanied by Lieutenant Harrington of Company C, again demanded to know who they were. Their reply was a volley, which killed Lieutenant Harrington. Colonel Walthall turned and walked back to the regiment looking like the proud gamecock he was and remarked, "Now I think I know who they are." Great anecdote indicating the confusion created by the terrain, the weather conditions, and the fog out here. Now this is Colonel Fry, the commander of the 4th Kentucky, the fellow who was most associated with Zollicoffer's death. I spotted an elevated point in the field on the left of the road. Now remember, his perspective is coming from the north. So the left of the road would be where we are here. Filed my regiment to the left, along a fence, and formed my line of battle parallel with and near to it, under a heavy and galling fire from the enemy, who were concealed in a deep ravine at the foot of the hill and posted on the opposite hill, distant 250 yards. This is the fun thing about coming to battlefields, because that is a precise description of where we're standing here, and very accurate. Their line extended around the ridge and at the head of the ravine, and onto the hill occupied by me within 50 yards of my right, which means the Confederates are going around on top of the hill just beyond where the buses are parked. So this gives you an idea of the extent of what was really only a 2-regiment long battle line for the Confederates out here at this point. Covered throughout its extent by the fence and separating the field from the wood lines and by the timber growth there too. The field on this side, woods on the other. The engagement at once became very warm. Finding I was greatly outnumbered by the enemy under cover, I ordered my men to the opposite side of the fence. So here they are where I'm standing now. Now here he is continuing about his confrontation with General Zollicoffer, as Ed has indicated right out about where we're standing. As I neared the road, I saw an officer riding slowly down the road on a white horse and within 20 paces of my regiment. His uniform was concealed, except for the extremities of his pantaloons, which I observed were the color worn by federal officers, by a long green overcoat. His near approach to my regiment, his calm manner, my close proximity to him, indeed everything I saw, led me to believe that he was a federal officer belonging to one of the federal regiments just arriving. So thoroughly was I convinced that he was one of our men, I did not hesitate to ride up to his side so closely that our knees touched. He was calm, self-possessed, and dignified in manner. He said to me, "We must not shoot our own men," to which I replied, "Of course not." I would not do so intentionally. Then turning his eyes to the left and pointing in the same direction, he said, "Those are our men." And I could not see the men from my position, but I now suppose that they were there. I immediately moved off to the right of my regiment, perhaps some 15 or 20 paces from the spot on which I had met him. His language had convinced me more than ever that he was a federal officer. How it is that he did not discover that I was one, I can't tell, as my uniform was entirely exposed to view, having nothing on to conceal it. As soon as I reached my regiment, I paused, turning my horse a little to the left and across the road. I looked back to see what was going on, when to my great surprise, another officer, whom I had not seen, rode out from behind a large tree near the place of my meeting with the first officer, and with pistol in hand, leveled it and directly fired at me. Paused for a moment, doubtless to observe the effect of his shot. Instead of striking the object to which it was aimed, the ball struck my horse just above the hip, making a flesh wound. And so this precipitates Fry responding with his shot and a number of Kentuckians firing at Zollicoffer. And, Bill, somewhere I read that they identified somebody named Chrisman as the potential slayer of Zollicoffer, but I don't know if that's true or not.
Also remember that he said archaeology showed there was a road where you're standing. Correct? Bill? Did you say archaeology showed a road was right in here?
Yes, I mean, you're standing on it. We'll stand right in the middle of it.
So now, one final thing I'll say here before continuing on to the second attack, when the 2nd Minnesota comes up, is the description of Zollicoffer and the recovery of his body. This is from a newspaper correspondent, so it must be true.
Who's authorized?
Of course, in all battles, somebody must be killed, and somebody must be wounded. This was no exception to the general rule. I shall mention only one of the dead. That one, Zollicoffer. He lay by the side of the road along which we passed, and all had a fair view of what was once Zollicoffer. I saw the lifeless body as it lay in a fence corner by the side of the road, but Zollicoffer himself is now in hell. Hell is a fitting abode for such arch traitors. May all other chief conspirators in this rebellion soon share the fate of Zollicoffer, shot dead through the instrumentality of an avenging God. Their spirits sent straightway to hell, and their lifeless bodies lie in a fence corner, their faces spattered with mud, and their garments divided up, and even the hair off their head cut off and pulled out by an unsympathizing soldiery of a conquering army battling for the right. Fair and balanced. From the Cincinnati Commercial.
Any questions?
I'd like to also point out that the reason this fence ends here, we do not own the land on the other side of that fence. We're still trying to get it. You see all the cows. I always give my talk when I'm in Washington to park service people. I got 100 volunteers that work on this farm every day. Well, that's my cows, because we let the farmer, we rent the farm to him. So he runs his cows everywhere on us to help keep our land clean, because we don't have the manpower otherwise to do it. We don't have the pleasure like Perryville has, where they're state park and has state employees that work on it. Yes, we have. We know where everything is. But you never find it all. The farthest line that we've been able to determine, the farthest line that this fence went to is just by what he said, those trees in the middle of that wheat field. That is about where the archaeological stuff stops. So they were attacking out of the ravine, and that's about as far. You got to remember, this is the first fight for these troops. So they're a 1,000-man regiment. There's a lot of guys in a regiment here. And like what, 2 years later, regiment had, 300, 400, 500 in it. So what they're fighting here, when you talk about a regiment, the regiment of the 4th Kentucky was stretched from that tree up there to that fence line down there, just one regiment.
What's the purpose of having a fence here at all?
Well, in the days, like he's given the great description of how poor our country was and how ignorant we all were at that time, is that you let your cows and your hogs run loose. You fenced in the corn to keep them out of the corn, not to keep cows in. You didn't fence them in, you fenced them out. So on that side of this was woods. On this side, believe it or not, was cleared field. Why? It don't make sense to me. It's the wrong place. As a farmer, which I am, why would you be farming the hillside? But they were fencing the cows and the horses, the cows and the pigs on that side.
Not just local to you. They do it in Adams County
Yeah.
and Washington County. You fence the animals out.
Not in.
Not in. And you have, I don't think Kentucky had rigid fence laws, but in Maryland and Pennsylvania they had rigid fence laws. So over your property bounds of public road, you have to have a stout post and rail fence, not a whimp's post and rail fence. On your interior fences, you can have what you want, because in Maryland and Pennsylvania, if your animals got out on the highway, you look like a personal injury lawyer to me. And you would sue. But you have another lawsuit in that type. This guy has high-grade livestock. This guy has the cheapest bulls and stallions you can have. And his cheap bull or a stallion gets out and it predates your prize animal. That is also a personal injury suit. So you lawyers